Welcome back to We Move Through Stormy Weather, a Phish podcast where we compare and contrast songs and the evolution of their jamming styles throughout the band's career. My name is Ryan Storm, and today I am joined by Ira Haberman. As the host and executive producer of the Sound podcast, Ira has almost 20 years of experience working in all facets of media in Canada. He has always had a passion for music and saw his first Grateful Dead show on December 28, 1991 in Oakland, California, and his first Phish show on December 12, 1992 in Toronto. When he isn't listening to music or enjoying a live show, you can catch him watching a Toronto Blue Jays, Raptors, or Leafs game. Ira is also the proud father of 2 teenage girls who are not fans of Dad's music. Ira, say hi.
Hey.
Thank you so much for coming on today. Very excited to sit down and talk some Phish with you.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I don't get to talk Phish with a lot of people, so this is exciting.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
I'm a huge fan of the Sound as well, and
really
thanks,
love,
man. The awesome, all the different bands and all the people you get to talk to. It's very, very cool to listen to.
Yeah, thanks, man. We hope, if people are interested in checking out other bands other than Phish, they should definitely check out the Sound podcast with Ira Haberman. So,
and I'm also really excited to finally have another Torontonian on the podcast. All my guests have been American so far.
Oh wow, yeah.
So,
this has always been a Phish hotbed since going back to '92. So there's no reason why Torontonians shouldn't be talking Phish. It's a huge Phish community in the city, actually. So
absolutely
happy to represent.
Yes. And why don't you talk a little bit about, you chose Weekapaug Groove for today's episode. What made you choose that song?
It's just a lot of fun, and it's a lot of energy. And usually, coming off Mike's song and Hydrogen, you go for that real bounce, and Weekapaug offers that up. And also, I just find that Gordo's playing is so incredible off the top that it's such a great groove that how can you resist it? Now, it has been played, maybe even overplayed. It's something like 25 or 26% of the time it's been played. It shows 26.5% of the time it's been played at a live Phish show.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet you didn't know this. It's been played 496 times.
Yeah, it's one of the most played Phish songs, and I have not seen it live.
I don't think I have either, but that's interesting. Maybe I have.
How many shows have you seen?
I've seen about a dozen, I think.
And you haven't seen Weekapaug? I feel like I've seen 7 and no Weekapaug.
Now I'm not one of these people who takes notes right away and all of this, and sometimes I'm not entirely there for the show, if you know what I mean. So it's possible that I have seen it and I don't remember. In fact, it's likely that I've seen the concert hall here in Toronto, 94. So maybe I did see it.
There you go.
And I just don't remember. But there you go. Niagara Falls Convention Center in 95. So I've seen it a few times, in fact.
You were at Niagara Falls 95? Oh,
yes.
I'm jealous.
Yes, I was.
I've told my dad a whole bunch of times that he should have been at that show.
Yeah, why wasn't your dad at that show?
I don't know. He saw them he saw the Spectrum show in 92 and then didn't see them again until 99.
Right. I was at that Spectrum show was my first show. Yeah. And then
that's a common thread among you guys.
Toronto.
Toronto Phish fans. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about the version that you picked for Weekapaug. So which one is that?
That is 98, 11/27/98.
The infamous Wipeout show.
It is the Wipeout show. So that's another reason why I chose this one, is because there's all this stuff going on in the show that has nothing to do with Weekapaug, although it does show up. So it begins with this stellar version of Type 1 jamming and some excellent funk. And then they go into Wipeout. Now, Wipeout is you have to understand that Wipeout is in and out of the entire show.
Yes.
They tease it all over the place. And then it's Wipeout for $1.29. And then they go back into Weekapaug. And then there's this Weekapaug reprise that again starts out as a frenetic type 1 jam.
Similar to the the Dayton 97 tube in that regard. They end the song and then start the jam again.
Right. And then it goes into this type 2 thing, which has a lot of heavy effects and spacey jam, but it's actually very minimalistic in my opinion. It's a lot of
Absolutely.
Trey, sounding a lot like Jimi Hendrix. I think is a lot of
Mm.
those effects, like a lot of reverb and stuff, which I really enjoyed. And then into my favorite Phish song, which is Antelope. But um, it's that jamming, it's that frenetic jamming, and Mike Gordon is just a beast on this song. I think it's one of the few songs. There are a few others, but early on that really showcased his abilities as a bass player. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, the speed at which he slaps is
Yeah,
absolutely inhuman.
right.
It's mind blowing to me. Like, I mean, obviously, I listened to yours after I listened to my version, so it was significantly faster, and I was like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah,
uh,
well,
Crazy. And Trey goes absolutely shred mode right out of the gate on this 11/27/98 Weekapaug, which is, I mean, it's a hallmark of 1.0. Insane guitar track.
yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, that's I was trained on Trey for Type 1, right?
Yeah.
So for me, that's when I fell in love with this guy, just totally destroying everything and everyone in his wake playing guitar. And so he shreds throughout. And the thing that's also incredible to me and doesn't get enough recognition probably is Fishman. like you have
Absolutely.
you have Gordo and Trey absolutely shredding, and this thing is at a very fast pace, and Fishman's there the whole time and doesn't let up at all. Like he's driving the train more than Gordo even.
Yeah, and
Um,
he's playing, and even through the ambient section towards the end, he's still keeping up that fast groove, which is
yes,
crazy to me. He basically plays uh, that fast for 20 minutes unrelenting, which is so insane.
yeah, it's unbelievable. In fact, like I don't know many drummers that there are very few drummers probably that could keep up that frenetic pace, and he's certainly one of them. And so it's just a very high energy version of the song, and that's why I always go back to it because, well, because I get to hear the antelope after, but also because that whole set is so good,
Yeah.
and the whole wipeout thing is hilarious. So that's why I
Yes.
chose that one.
Yes. Well, yeah. We'll get back into that in a little bit. We'll talk about my pick, which was 12/30/18 MSG. It's actually two consecutive episodes where I pick a jam from this show. The last episode I picked "Split Open and Melt" from this
Right.
show. But this is my favorite Weekapaug. I honestly I go back to it all the time because, especially as a keyboard player, this the Type 2 section of this jam is very much the Page show. Um,
Yeah.
it's I also, to me, this jam is so cohesive, and all four band members are like, you know, they kind of like Page takes the lead on one part, then he steps back and Trey takes the lead, and um there's not a lot of searching to me in this jam. It's 8 minutes shorter than the Wipeout one, but
Yeah.
I find that it does so much in its relatively short 12 minutes, and not to mention the segue into Cross-Eyed after, which is
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this version?
Well, it's also interesting that it comes in from tube, right? Like that's that's a little different too. So
Wait, yes, when it gets finished later in the set, absolutely.
yeah. So my feeling is it feels like, a Type 3, a
Type
Weekapaug.
3.
It's very, very compact in its delivery.
Hmm.
There are some great grooves, obviously, and Page is great as well, but it really is, for me, doesn't have the extended kind of feel and all the gimmicks of the one I picked,
Hmm.
112798. And I kind of like that. So I'm old school in that I like some of the gimmicks. I mean, this is a straight ahead Weekapaug, and it comes in, like 12 and a half minutes, I guess. So
Yeah.
um, for me, it's straight ahead. They get the job done, and it's there. Um, but it's very it's plain-ish to me. You know what I mean? Like
Interesting.
um, not
I
as
always find it
exciting as the
funny because I feel that way about your version in some aspects. Like to me, it's there's not a lot of unique jamming in this Wipeout Week pod. Like it's crazy, fiery Type 1, and then very classic late '90s funk jam for a couple of minutes, then
yeah.
Wipeout, then more Type 1 Weekapaug, and then the last 8 minutes of ambience. To me, there's not a lot going on, and it sounds like Trey is just kind of dicking around with his effects and not really doing much for a lot of it.
For sure.
Which it there's I mean I look at Phish very differently than a lot of people do in the in the regard that I do prefer the last
Right.
few years and improvisation wise. Obviously, you can't touch the late '90s for chops and speed and whatnot. But I like the improvisation that this 12 and a half minute version brings. It moves through, there's the Type 1 section that ends at 5 minute
Yeah.
45, and then Trey hits that the minor chord with the delay to signify like, all right, we're going Type 2 here, which is a treat in this version because Weekapaug does not go Type 2 very much these days. And so I think, and the band is so energized. This whole show, honestly, is
Yes.
absolutely phenomenal, and the band is so energized. But I love the way, Trey's able to step back on this one and let Page lead the jam for a while, which, at the beginning of the Type 2 section, Page is definitely at the forefront on the clav.
Hmm.
And during that synth part, with the where it almost goes into woos, but Paige is like, nah, synth time. And Page is definitely leading that, and then Trey executes a perfect segue back into Weekapaug proper, which, yes, the jam probably could have kept going, but I
Right.
think the way they did that and the way it went back in, it was just so perfect. There was no like stumbling to catch up to him, or the other band members like taking a few seconds to get back in. It just worked at the perfect time. I don't know how you felt about that, but
Yeah, there's no question that the band catches up and it all works out. And there's no question that it's a great Weekapaug. I'm not denying that at all. And I like that whole show actually. I usually like anything from MSG
yeah,
generally, um,
it's a good
and
rule.
and generally New Year's Run especially. So I thought it was great too. I just for me, I kind of like the old school thrashiness of Trey early on, and
Hmm.
uh,
Albeit
I, I
much
I
slower.
yeah, much slower. Like the new stuff is much slower. And the other thing is that no, it's not slow compared to some other bands who continue to play. But having said that,
We won't name them.
no, we won't do that. Having said that, the thing I do like about later on Fish is just the sonic quality. It's a much crisper sound, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they really have the PA down, they really have the recording down, and even the live stream. So for me, that's the part that is extremely enjoyable. Is that it sounds a lot better. Like sonically, overall, the presentation is a lot sharper.
Yeah.
But if I could see '98 with the same sort of sound quality, or listen to it with the same sort of sound quality,
Right.
I'd pick '98 every day. Every day.
Yeah, and I think that's the great thing. I mean, in the by '98, the sound was pretty good versus like the earlier '90s when you couldn't really hear Mike or something like that. But
Right.
one thing that stuck out to me about your version in terms of listening was later in the jam. Paige was like towards the end of the jam. Paige was playing some fantastic stuff on piano, but it was really hard to focus on because Trey was like playing weird screechy guitar over it,
Yeah.
which I didn't really like so much towards the end, and I think kind of took away from that. But that was
That
part
that's in
of
the
the
that's in the ambient section, right? That's
yeah,
towards
yeah,
the end.
yeah.
Yeah,
And to me, that's really a hallmark of like Trey's ego in the late '90s. Like he was like, this is me. Like I'm not, like I'm in charge here. Versus, and my version where he's able to confidently step back and let Paige lead for a solid portion of it.
right, right. Well, there's what 20 years difference in the growth of the band from
Yeah.
from one version to the other. So at a certain point, and certainly after all of the return, and by 2018 they're well in the groove from the return.
Oh yeah.
Certainly by then he understands that he has to give way to the other players. But if you close your eyes, and this is an experiment that I do not just with Fish, but I do it with other jam bands as well,
Hmm.
specifically the Grateful Dead, I guess. If you close your eyes and try to tune Trey out, you're absolutely right. The page parts there are amazing. And so that's, I think, maybe one of the differences between earlier years and later years is that you don't have to tune anybody out. There sort of is this give and take that's a lot more apparent
Hmm.
in later versions. And I don't necessarily think it's an ego thing. By the way, I think it's just where the band was and having Trey at the forefront. So
That's a good
I'm
point.
I'm not convinced it's an ego because to my recollection at least, Trey is not one of these ego guys. It just thinks that that's where the music was and that's kind of where they were taking it back in the day. Tell me more about why 1218, why those jams and the segue into Cross-Eyed. Talk to me a bit about that segue into Cross-Eyed.
Well, I mean, I remember. So when I was streaming this show, I was at an airport in Peru, and we were waiting to board a flight. Like we were taking like a domestic flight back to Lima that night, and we were sitting in the airport, and my dad and I were sharing a pair of headphones, listening to the first set. And I remember like, we were sitting listening. I was like, wow, this Weekapaug is amazing. And then Trey earlier in the jam, kind of early in the minor key part, he kind of almost teases Cross-Eyed. He almost plays the ba-na-na. And I remember thinking like, oh, sounded a bit like Cross-Eyed there, and that still sticks out to me every time I listen to it. And then at the end of the jam, when they pull it back into Weekapaug, you expect it to wrap up like big finish, like wow, that was great. But then they break into this staccato plinko-ish jam, and this is the only part where I think they were kind of like, all right, which direction do we go now? You know, they could
Right.
keep jamming, they could finish Weekapaug, or go off into this other jam. And I think Trey just kind of accidentally stumbled upon the cross-eyed melody, then was like, yeah, let's do it. And so I love the roar of the crowd when everyone realizes that they're going into cross-eyed. And then when they kick it off, because cross-eyed doesn't show up in the first set too often, and
Right.
it's just fantastic to hear like oh, it's here now. Very cool. And and even though that doesn't end up being a jammed out cross-eyed, still really cool placement. And I love the segue.
But you know what? Now that I think about it, Mike's Weekapaug doesn't show up that often in first sets either, does it?
Yeah, I think it's kind of balanced. I think it's more abnormal to see it in the second set
Yeah.
nowadays than it used to. In the 90s, it used to be much more of a jam vehicle because second jam and Weekapaug was going type 2 almost every outing.
Right.
But nowadays, it's showing up in the second set is kind of like, all right, like here's a 15-minute segment where we're not going to get much jamming, or we're going to get some nice type 1 jamming. Exceptions, of course, being like Baker's Dozen or Nashville 2015 or 2018 when they took them type 2. But for the most part, you're getting like a 7 or 8 minute mics followed by a song or two, and then a 7 or 8 minute Weekapaug. And I think in the first set, I mean, this is an especially strong Mike's groove because although the Mike's is type 1, it's longer than normal. Got some great interplay, pages on the clav for part of it, which is a little bit abnormal. You have the glide 2 bust out in between them, and then obviously this fantastic type 2 Weekapaug, which I think this might have been the first type 2 Weekapaug since Nashville 2015. I could be wrong about that, but I believe it is. So it's this one sticks out to me more as like, it's a treat.
The other thing that I didn't mention is that there is a Nelly Kane tease as well in my Weekapaug groove. So if you're down for even more old school type thoughts, there's that Nelly Kane tease as well. I just want to, you know what? Now that you mention it, I want to just see. So the 2018, you're right. Sorry, I do this once in a while.
Yeah, that's fine. You're looking at the jam chart?
I am looking at the jam chart. There are some 2015.
Oh, the rally one. Okay.
A lot of these are, right? Like
yeah, so there's one from Walnut Creek the week after Nashville where there's it kind of dips into type 2 briefly.
right.
But this is it's a true the
type
first
2.
True type 2 version since then. And I mean, we had the one from Dick's last year, kind of still a relatively short version, doesn't go anywhere particularly interesting, but it does go type 2 and ends unfinished. And then we had the crazy, encore version from Mexico back in February that did go type 2 because it was kind of a stop in Weekapaug as part of the, it was like an extension of the Sand Jam, which was really cool because I discussed this in the last episode, I believe. Jammy encores are awesome. They should happen more.
Yeah, well, they don't happen because traditionally what happens is they have to get the hell out of the whatever room they're in, so they don't really have. But I guess in the case of Mexico, they had a chance to jam a little longer and not have to get out of the room, right?
Yeah, and it's cool hearing like an atypical song like Sand start off an encore.
Totally.
And they kick into that. That Sand is a song that kind of works anywhere in the show.
Yes.
There's a great group of songs like that. Like I think honestly, like a Mike's groove can work in most places in a show.
Yep.
So it's cool to listen to different song placements like that. Definitely. Yeah. The one thing I also wanted to mention about your version that you picked is there's some really nice, very subtle because the Rhodes was very quiet in the mix in the 90s, but at around the 14-minute mark, there's some really, really like gentle Rhodes playing from Page, and that also happens in my version. It's just
Yeah.
more audible, and I absolutely adore the way Page plays the Rhodes in every situation.
I'm a sucker for Rhodes generally, so
I think most people are. It's
I
just
think I probably picked up on that, and that's one of the reasons why I love this version so much. But
mhm.
yes, he does make use of everything. I think there's even just piano section in this Wickapog groove, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken, um, which is incredible, right? I mean, these guys are really in form in '98, just like they're really in form in 2018, and so there's nothing that they can't stretch or do, and that's why that 8-minute ambient jam at the end comes out, because they're just having fun and doing what they do and have the
right.
opportunity to really do anything at this point, and it was so much energy from the wipeout thing and from everything else that they were doing. I mean, that second set, this Weekapaug and
Crazy.
and
Yeah.
and the Antelope at the end, but this second set is all on fire. I mean, it is, chalk dust into mirror into chalk dust, dog log, chalk dust. I mean, it's a crazy
Speaking of
set.
dog
So
log, they should bust out dog log.
there you go.
Good song.
Insanity. I mean, it's in Buffalo Bill. So I mean,
Yeah.
this is very early, great, not very early, but early on Fish stuff. And what's great about it is that they allow themselves the opportunity. They take the opportunity to do
hmm
that additional 8-minute jam at the end, which I don't think they do a lot anymore with this tune. In fact, I'm sure they don't. And
I
and
mean, have
that's
have they done that reprise jam any other time? This is the first time I heard it with Weekapaug. Um, I mean, I know they've done it. They did it with Tube a bunch in the late '90s. But I haven't, heard of this happening with Weekapaug any other time.
I'm going to
Again,
say
I could be
no.
wrong.
I'm going to say
But
no.
yeah, to me, that's a really cool and unique way to do this. Like, I was listening to it earlier, and I remember being surprised when they wrapped it up at at the 10-minute mark or so. And I was like, wait, like I'm halfway through the song. What's going on? And
Yeah.
then they kicked it off again. And I was like, oh, okay. I assumed it was going to be, um, a situation where they like start like an ambient jam off the last note of the song. But this was really cool too. And I also really like how quickly the jam fades into ambience after the quick reprise jam. Like at the 12-minute mark, I think within 10 seconds it goes from Trey melting faces with a guitar solo to just serene ambience.
Yeah. Yeah, and then him fucking around sorry, are we allowed to use that language here?
Yes, you're allowed to swear.
Okay. To him, well, I did anyway. To him, with all that distortion and all that stuff that he's doing, it's, to me, that's really cool stuff, and
Yeah,
an ode to Jimi Hendrix. In my opinion, it sounded very Jimmy.
yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah,
so
you had the heavy use of the wah pedal as well, which I think contributes to that a little bit. And the wah coupled with the octave down sound on the whammy sounds great. And he uses those two effects in conjunction a lot more these days. I
yeah,
think recently he started kicking on the octave down every time he uses the wah because it adds a little bit more low end, a little bit more uh, grit to the sound, which
yeah.
I really like.
Well, this is where you kind of, you're better at things because you're a musician and you understand I just hear it and think, yeah, I like that. I don't
Right.
I don't I don't specifically know what it's called or how it works, but I do know that that's what's taking place, which is fun, right? I mean, it's just different way to interpret what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one point you mentioned earlier about kind of the 20-year difference between the two versions. And I want to kind of draw a parallel between 1998 and 2018.
Okay.
They were both just coming off of like a huge achievement the year before. So obviously 97 was the development of the funk, and Fall 97 happened, and 2017 was the Baker's Dozen. And I think in both 98 and 2018, they were kind of riding that wave and seeing like, all right, where else can we push this? Because you see, I mean, 2018 happens to be my favorite year of Phish, and fall 2018 happens to be my favorite Phish tour.
Hmm.
And I think there's just such a wide breadth of improvisation in that tour, and even over that MSG run that this Weekapaug is a part of. There's so many different kinds of jams happening. You have the absolute bliss of the tweezer from the 29th. Then you have the crazy alien space evil split open and melt on the 30th. This Weekapaug, obviously, there's just so many different jamming styles coming together, and it's kind of a culmination of what they had been working on. The more democratic approach to improvisation that they've really developed since 2015 or so. And I think 1998 they started with the funk sound, and they really built it into what would come to fruition in 99, which with the really ambient groove jams.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing I love about 98 is they keep they keep the groove grounded, and there's still stuff happening instead of kind of going off into space, which would happen a year later by fall 99 with the sands and stuff.
Yep.
But what's your take on that?
Well, it's interesting because I'm looking at set lists from around 97 now, even going even a little earlier than that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find interesting is that it's true, they are picking up steam and they are doing all of these shows. Now, the other thing too that's interesting for me is, 95, 93 were their really big years. And
Mm-hmm.
if you think about it, they're really getting back to things in 98 when this show happens. And so what I think is happening is it's just a maturation, right, of the band.
Yeah.
And so it happens a couple of times because of the band's history. And so, there's the break, and then there's the comeback in '09, and then it takes about 9 years for them to get to where they are with this 2018 stuff. And the same could be said, like, they're sort of rebuilding what they had been doing for so many years by the time they get to 98, that
Yeah.
it allows for these jams to take place. And it's a good point. The 97 funk is an important kind of milestone too to all of this.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I love 94, 95 and all, but I'm much more into the grooves of the late 90s than I am the kind of noise tension jams of those couple of years. And I think that 98 is kind of the perfect balance between the straight funk of 97 and
Right.
the ambientness of 99.
It's funny that you mentioned the funkiness, because even they opened this show with Funky Bitch. The
Mm-hmm.
11. No, that's not true.
Yeah, they
Yeah, it
do.
is true. Yeah, they do open it with Funky Bitch. So there is a lot of that going on, right? I mean, throughout, and Birds of a Feather. And so all of those things that you'd think of in the quote unquote funk era are kind of happening here, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to. One thing, obviously, also that is very different about my pick is the number of effects and instruments that they have at their disposal. So
Right.
I think with the exception of Fishman, they all have very different. I mean, Fishman probably has a very different drum kit than he did in the '90s, but at the root, it's I think a lot of the core pieces are the same.
Yes.
But Trey has a completely different guitar rig. Page has these synths at his disposal now, and the Wurlitzer that he didn't back in '98, and Mike has all these different effects. And I think it's really cool to listen to how they use them differently, because obviously there are some jams in the last few years where sure they might have an over reliance on like Trey's guitar effects.
Mm-hmm.
To give an example, but one thing I really like here is Trey's use of the Leslie, which I think he used it in a pretty much every jam over summer 2018. But then by the fall, and by this point, certainly he had taken to using it in a much better way. Not as often, but he uses it as a way to, make it easier for Phish, Mike, or Page to take control of the jam, because it kind of gives his guitar a more background quality to it. And I mean, I absolutely adore the Leslie speaker sound. with the guitar. And Mike has this synth bass effect as well that he used a lot in 2018. That's very present in this in this jam. And it's cool to listen to the parallels because Page in the '98 version is on piano or clav for most of the jam, where in my version he's constantly hopping from piano to clav to whirly to synth to Rhodes, and it's really cool to listen to.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think Page does do a lot more. I think in 2018 than he had been doing
Absolutely.
earlier on. Not just in terms of the number of instruments or the number of keyboards that he plays, but in terms of filling in gaps and just doing more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that speaks to the democratization of the jam, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
and letting everybody in more than had happened earlier on.
Yeah, definitely. And Page, I mean, Page has really stepped up. I think it was the addition of the Moog Voyager synth at the beginning of 2017 that really kind of inspired him to start really taking control of some jams, taking the lead on a lot of stuff, which has been, especially as a keyboard player for me, I have loved listening to that happen. And I mean, some of my notes for this, for my Weekapaug include Pages slaying the clav, and then my next note was just arrows pointing to that. Whirly God is in the building. Synth
Yes.
Lord, Synth Lord, Synth Lord in all
Yes.
caps. Page is destroying everything in his path on the synth, and then Page goes back to destroying the whirly as Trey begins to solo. So I mean, you can tell that I
That you
really
play
like
keyboards.
Page is playing. Yes, and then I'm a keyboard player. I making notes is fun because sometimes I take them seriously and sometimes I write nonsense like that.
No, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really have any true moments like that in your version because I think there's a lot more unique ground broken in mine, if that makes any sense. Like as amazing as the shredding and the funk is, and that ambient section, there are a ton of other jams that I can go to in 97, 98, 99 that will get me, a very similar jam. But this one, to me at least, seems really unique. And I think that's something they've been good at the past few years. Yes, they do lean on a bliss jam a lot. But something like this where, they don't go bliss jam and they go to this like relatively fast and like hard charging groove.
Right.
With the crazy synths and stuff. And, I think people will look at this one more favorably because Page saved everyone from the woos that Trey was trying to start.
Well, the other thing too is that they didn't have as much time, right? So, well, they could have, I suppose, but
Yes.
it's a lot tighter, right? It's 12 minutes as opposed to the 20 and a half or whatever the hell this one is. It just seems to go on because of the reprise,
The
because of the
8-minute
wipeout,
ambient section, yeah.
and the 8-minute ambient section. So, I mean, it's that ambient section that really makes it it's 9, according to jam charts. The ambient section's about 9 minutes. So, like, including the reprise. So,
Mm-hmm.
if you take that out of it and you put them up against each other, I guess they're about the same. Mine's a little shorter.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
yours has more depth to it probably than mine.
yeah, and I think it speaks to how good they've gotten at improvisation the past few years because they're reaching spaces in 10 minutes that it used to take them 25 minutes to get to.
Right.
And that's something that I think Page said that in the It documentary where he was like, sometimes it'll take them 20, 25 minutes to get to this really amazing jam, but then they'll get to it. And so that those 20 to 25 minutes are more important. And now it takes them significantly less time to get to that point. So if you look at a tour like Fall 2019, where there are no jams above 20 minutes, there's still so much improvisation packed into those 8 shows. While nothing is super long, you have a 10-minute version of a song that has, a 5 minutes of really solid type 2, and that type 2 isn't just, a funk groove for 5 minutes.
Right. There's
They've
nothing
got
wasted. Yeah.
yeah, there's not they might still meander a little bit, but they're constantly looking for the next idea. They're not content to sit on a groove for 15 minutes anymore, which I really like. And as much as I enjoy late 90s funk jams, I am a huge fan of, finding this idea, exploring it for a couple of minutes, and then moving on to the next one.
Right. Well, over time, and we do mention the 20 years, and I don't mean to belabor it, but that's 20 years of learning each other, and that's 20 years learning the song and playing the song. I mean, if they played it 26% of the time
Right.
over those 20 years, I mean, that's playing this tune quite a lot. And so they have a chance to get it a lot tighter. And because they're not playing um they're playing longer sets in terms of how many songs they play in a set these days.
And in terms of time, a lot of, not a blanket statement, but a lot of, the really iconic 4 or 5 song second sets were like, 58 minutes or just over
Right.
an hour. And now they're playing like, people will complain like, oh, like that set could have been 4 songs, but they had to add this character 0 on the end. They had to add this cavern. I'm of the belief that I would much rather get, 5 or 7 more minutes more of Phish on this show. I don't care about, how many songs they play, but if they want to play for an hour and 20 minutes and make it 8 songs, go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the other big difference, right? Is that they were playing well, just the speed of the song too. I mean, just the speed of my Weekapaug, especially off the top,
Right.
for longer, or for longer, means that they have shorter sets in terms of what they can fit in, and sometimes some of those sets are segue into segue into segue into segue,
Yeah.
whereas now they have an opportunity to play songs to their completion, and that sort of started around this 2018 era, probably.
Well, yeah, I definitely think it's gone up and down because 2018 they were playing with a certain confidence, at least improvisationally, where, Trey, sure, he not the most polished and he was screwing up a decent amount, but he would like laugh off the flubs and keep going and, just get to this amazing improvisational space. But obviously it kind of regressed a little bit in 2019, and we saw like kind of a return of like the set list, or like the weird set list choices of early 3.0 or a year like 2016 where a lot of that was happening. And I think you know towards the end of the year, like I think the MSG run and the Mexico run from the beginning of this year really showed us the band was, they kind of used 2019 as a kind of a transition year because they were also integrating 2 full albums of material into the set list, which isn't easy to do. You have to find where each thing works.
Mm-hmm.
All the Cast of Vax songs, all the Ghosts of the Forest songs that they were playing, and I think 2020 was poised to be another highlight year, which unfortunate.
Well, it still was a highlight year. It just wasn't a highlight year in a live setting. But in
Right.
terms of releasing material, and Trey especially releasing material, it's still a pretty big year for the community in terms of the amount of music that has come out this year.
True enough. Yeah, and I mean we've definitely been getting more archival releases than normal, which has been nice. The recent we had that Fall '99 show like a month ago, the Bozeman Tweezer show recently, which is it's been awesome. And I mean I'm still holding out hope that somehow for New Year's next week we will be getting
I think
a live
they're
show.
pretty good at keeping secrets, but I think at this point, with 2 weeks to go, my mind would be absolutely blown if they just show up and play somewhere.
I mean, yeah, I think also because of the way that COVID is rampaging everywhere right now, it seems less likely. And I think you know, Page's unwillingness to come to the Beacon Jams will also kind of carry over into this.
Totally. I mean, if there was any opportunity for them to have done it, it would have been the Beacon Jams, right? I mean, John was there, so to get
I
two more
mean,
guys.
I kind of I was of that opinion for a while, but I've kind of thought about it recently, and that was Trey's. Like, it was Trey Anastasio, the Beacon Jams, and I think Phish being there wouldn't have fit with the Trey centric theme of it.
Oh, I
Um,
agree. I'm just talking. I'm making mention of all the rumors that one of the nights is
right.
definitely going to be the four of them, and so if it was going to happen, I think it would have happened then as opposed to New Year's. But
Yeah, and I mean, I think that there's still a chance because I think Phish as an organization knows that the vast majority of us, if they announced it at 5 p.m. on the 31st,
yeah,
everyone would watch.
right.
Like, and
Yeah,
nobody really has like crazy plans this year. Like, what are you gonna do? Watch someone else's webcast?
right.
Um, and I mean, I pick Phish over everything. So, but yeah, I'm holding out hope that we get that. But I think the more likely scenario is a run of dinner and a movies for the 28th to the 31st, with probably New Year's '95 on the
Oh, that would
31st
be
for the
good.
25th anniversary. But obviously, the ideal situation would be Big Cypress,
Right.
which doesn't seem terribly likely, but I can dream.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully they'll play Weekapaug Groove if they do play.
Yes.
At any rate, right now that we've talked about it for so long, hopefully they'll play it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see them. I think it's a 4-night run. So I can't see them playing a 4-night run without playing a Mike's Groove.
Right. If
Um,
this 4-night run happens,
yes, a hypothetical 4-night run. And I mean, honestly, it's funny because with the sheer number of dinner and movies we got, I think there were only a couple of Mike's Grooves across all 20 something episodes of it. So,
just has to be
as
just
common
has
of
to be
a,
5 of them.
yeah, and I don't know if there were. If in 27 maybe, or 22, I don't know. 28. There were 28 dinner and a movies, and yeah, I don't know. I don't think there were too many Mike's Grooves. But anyway, this Weekapaug discussion is great. One thing I do also want to note, uh, with I mean, Trey's tonal difference. We talked about the equipment, but
Yeah.
there's a very, very big difference in Trey's tone between these two shows. '98, you have the classic 2-tube screamer Ross compressor, and then the Fender amp tone, which I absolutely love.
Yeah.
And then his late 2018 tone, which is those Comet amps, which much dirtier, um, higher gain. And I think definitely changes the vibe a little bit because it's his tone isn't as clean as it used to be. And he also has this like reverb and delay effects loops built into his amps now. So if you listen, especially early on in his Type 1 Weekapaug solo of my pick, you can hear the little the echo of his notes. So he has it's set to, I think, every note just kind of echoes quietly after he plays it. And I like listening to that, when he's soloing, when he'll take a rest in his solo. So he'll play like a run of notes and then pause for a second, and the last one will, echo again. I really like the sound of that. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I do like the sound of that, and that's why I love the ambient jam. So imagine that ambient jam with the newer gear and the newer setup
Right.
would have been mind blowing. But it's true, the tone has changed a lot over the years, and the amount of effects and pedals and just his whole rig has changed so much that, and we've mentioned it too about Paige and Mike, is that everybody's it's impossible for it not to sound different just because of the instruments at their
Equipment, yeah.
disposal, the equipment at their disposal, right? So there's the pace, that's one thing. There's the the sonic kind of instrumentation, that's another thing. There's the pace of it. Oh, we mentioned the pace, but there's the idea of getting to a jam or extending a jam, which doesn't happen as long for as long as it did back in Type One days.
Hmm.
Um, so there's lots of differences, and I think most of the difference is just time. I mean, it comes down to there being so much time between the two.
Yeah, and you did mention, how the song, it's more of a treat when it gets jammed out now, and I kind of like that kind of mystique around some songs, like stuff like Weekapaug or Hallies or something like that. Songs that used to get jammed out all the time that don't really
Yes.
now, and it's such a treat when you get a Type Two Weekapaug or how they jammed out the last, I think, two versions of Hallies they played last year, which is very exciting because for the bulk of 3.0, they weren't jamming out things like that. They just recently, Jin has had a huge comeback the last couple of years. After not really being much of a jam vehicle with the exception of like Magnaball and a couple other versions, but in 2019 really really came back as kind of a leading jam vehicle. The last few versions of it have been absolutely phenomenal. Hood has come back in a big way the last few years.
Yes.
Um, Trying to think of what else.
But
Split
also
Open and Melt, also, as we talked about in the last episode, also such a great renaissance, I think.
Um, also, they're playing, the ghost stuff, and so there's so much more ways to get in and out of jams now. I find, and there's
Mm.
there's a lot more like that ghost stuff can be very ambient and therefore extend into other things in a more successful way, probably.
Yeah.
And the Caswell Vac stuff, while incredible and while extremely accessible, and while the only stuff that my kids will listen to from Phish, because it's fun. Um, there isn't a lot of there aren't enough vehicles in that material for jamming, right? So
I mean, there are plenty of vehicles. They just are refusing to jam them. Like Whack Tube is such a jam vehicle, but they don't jam it. And Cool Amber and Mercury, also
yes,
fantastic. Final Hurrah, like these songs they're being utilized as like first set, high energy songs, which is great. But I do want to see a 20-minute Cas Vax song.
I don't. Yeah, I agree, but I just don't. I don't see it happening because there are, like you said, there are renaissance of older songs, and there's the ghosts of the forest songs, and there's just a lot more jammier jammier material, probably, if I could put it
Listen,
that way.
anything can happen.
I
Just over
agree.
2 years ago, people would have laughed in your face if you said they were going to start jamming out Hallies again, and they
Oh,
started
I agree.
jamming it out again. Same, and you talk to someone in 2012, and you say like, they're going to be playing 20-minute jams in the first set again, and they'll be like, "What?"
Right.
Like, and I like the way that's happened too, because it didn't really happen until, I mean, the late 90s, but there were only really a few years where the line between the first and second set were kind of blurred, because in 95 and 96 Trey was still writing set lists for the most part, so he was putting the jammy songs in the second set, and so it wasn't really until, again, I think 2017, the Baker's doesn't really help that, I think, where they started getting Type 2 in the first set again, which has been such a treat because it used to be like in you go back to like 2013, 2014, you hear like a ghost in the first set. It's like, okay, it's going to be 10-minute ghost. Great. Now you're still most likely to get a 10-minute ghost, but then you could get something like Alpharetta 2018, which third song of the show, Ghost, 22 minutes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I like that they've gotten back to that space in the last couple of years where anything can happen.
Well, we'll see, right? Maybe I just got to see them live again. I think
I
that's
know.
the biggest thing, right? Right, jonesing to see as good as, and they were amazing. The Trey shows were. I mean, they
Mhm.
were incredible. Seeing the band together would just be dope as hell, right?
Absolutely. And even from the couch, there's a very big difference between watching an older live stream and watching a live stream that's happening right this second. Even if it's a show where I purposely didn't look at the set list before, so I don't know every song and when it's going to happen. There's something about, knowing that, this jam already happened. So it's not happening right this second versus watching them, watching it unfold in front of you. Like last year when I, live streamed the New Year's run and I was like screaming at the television during the MSG tweezer.
Yeah.
As was happening. But yeah, I think that's a great place to wrap up. I want to say thank you so much for coming on today.
Pleasure.
It was great talking Weekapaug and all those other amazing
Good luck with
things
this podcast. I really enjoyed listening to it.
Thank you so much.
Other episodes, not specifically this episode. I mean, this was fun too, but I enjoy listening to all of your guests, and certainly some of them are friends as well. Greg and Joel and some of your other guests that you've had on. It's all great stuff and continued success. All right.
Yeah, thank you. And don't forget, go check out Ira's podcast if you haven't already. It's called The Sound. It's awesome. Not only does he talk to big-name jam bands, but you've got, I know you interviewed Joe from Pluto Gang a couple of weeks ago, who I interact with frequently on
Watch out for Pluto
on
Gang.
Social media. Pluto Gang is coming. They are fantastic. If you don't know Pluto Gang, you should check out Pluto Gang. But anyway, hope you all enjoyed this episode. I'll see you next time and have a fantastic day.